Married for 1 year but never shared a bed, until the millionaire slammed the door and claimed her. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew the coffee would go cold before he came downstairs, but she made it anyway. Iris Malone stood in the pristine marble kitchen of the Beacon Hill mansion, her slender fingers wrapped around a porcelain mug that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across the spotless countertops. Everything in this house was perfect, calculated, just like the woman who inhabited it. At 27, Iris had mastered the art of emotional invisibility. Her dark skin glowed with a natural radiance that required no enhancement. Her hair pulled back in a sleek bun that framed her angular face with mathematical precision. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored navy pants. Professional, understated, unreachable. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times. Mike would be down in exactly 3 minutes. She knew, because she had observed his routine for 364 days. Tomorrow would mark their first anniversary. Tomorrow their contract would expire. Footsteps echoed from the marble staircase, heavy, measured, belonging to a man who commanded boardrooms but whispered good morning like an apology. "Morning, Iris." Mike Johnson appeared in the doorway, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. At 36, he possessed the kind of quiet authority that made investors lean forward and competitors step aside. His sandy hair was perfectly styled, his grey suit impeccable, but there was something vulnerable about the way he avoided her eyes. "Good morning." She placed his coffee on the kitchen island, black, no sugar, in the blue mug he preferred, the same ritual they had performed every morning for a year, the same careful distance. He picked up the mug, their fingers never touching. "Board meeting runs late today. Probably won't be back until after 9. I'll leave dinner in the warming drawer." Her voice was professional, courteous, the voice of a woman who had learned that feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford. Mike nodded, lingering a moment longer than necessary. There was something he wanted to say. There always was. But the invisible wall between them remained intact, built by lawyers, reinforced by pride, and guarded by a year of careful politeness. "Iris?" His voice caught slightly. She looked up, and for a heartbeat, something flickered between them. Something dangerous and real and absolutely forbidden by the terms of their arrangement. Never mind. He straightened his tie, the moment dissolving like sugar in rain. "Have a good day." The front door closed with a soft click, leaving Iris alone with the echo of what could have been. She walked to the window and watched his black Tesla disappear down Marlborough Street, swallowed by Boston's morning traffic. In her purse, hidden beneath receipts and business cards, lay an envelope. Divorce papers, signed and ready. Her attorney had delivered them yesterday with a knowing smile and a comment about returning to real life. But as Iris stood in the kitchen where she had learned to love the sound of his laugh during late-night phone calls to Tokyo, where she had memorized the way he hummed while reading financial reports, where she had fallen for a man she was contractually forbidden to touch, she wondered if she had ever lived a more real life than this one. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother Damon. "Treatment going well. Thank you for everything, sis. I love you." She closed her eyes, remembering why she had agreed to this arrangement. Damon's leukemia treatments, the medical bills that threatened to drown them both, Mike's unexpected proposition that had saved them from financial ruin. 1 year, 365 days of playing house with a millionaire who treated her like expensive china, beautiful, valuable, and too fragile to touch. Tomorrow she would return to her studio apartment in Jamaica Plain. Tomorrow she would resume her life as a freelance marketing consultant. Tomorrow she would pretend that her heart hadn't learned to skip beats every time Mike Johnson said her name. But today she still had 18 hours to memorize the way morning light painted his empty chair gold. She poured herself fresh coffee and sat at the kitchen island, staring at the divorce papers through her purse's open zipper. Outside, Boston hummed with purposeful energy, but inside this marble palace, time felt suspended between what was and what could never be. The grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, and Iris realized she was counting down more than just time. She was counting down heartbeats until goodbye. If you lived for an entire year next to someone who makes your heart race, but you couldn't even touch that person's hand, would you have the courage to leave on the last day, or would you fight for the love that was never allowed? And you, what would you do in Iris's place? Would you leave the divorce papers on the table and run away, Or would you confront Mike and reveal your true feelings? Tell us in the comments what your choice would be. The hardest part about leaving wasn't packing her clothes, it was deciding what memories she was allowed to take. Iris sat cross-legged on the Persian rug in her bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a year that felt both eternal and impossibly brief. The afternoon sun slanted through the bay windows, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny ghosts around her cardboard boxes. She held Mike's Harvard Business Review magazine in her hands, the one from last February where he'd been featured on the cover. "Boston's most eligible bachelor builds hotel empire," the headline read. She had bought 3 copies that day, one for Damon, one to keep, and one she'd left casually on the kitchen counter, hoping Mike would notice her pride in his success. He never mentioned it, but she'd caught him reading her handwritten notes in the margins, where she'd scribbled "brilliant strategy and this is why you're extraordinary" in pencil. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. "Miss Malone." Iris looked up to find Cordelia, the housekeeper who had become something between a mother figure and a co-conspirator over the past year. The older woman's silver hair was pulled back in her signature bun, her kind eyes crinkling with concern. "I brought you some tea," Cordelia said, setting a delicate china cup on the nightstand. "Earl Grey with honey, just how you like it. Thank you." Iris's voice came out smaller than intended. Cordelia lingered, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "You know, in 40 years of keeping house for wealthy folks, I've never seen a man look at his wife the way Mr. Johnson looks at you." Iris stiffened. "We're not really married. Child, I've seen real marriages that were faker than yours." Cordelia sat on the edge of the bed, her voice gentle but firm. "That man asks me every morning if you slept well. Not because he heard you tossing and turning, because he lies awake listening for it." Heat rose in Iris's chest, dangerous and unwelcome. "It doesn't matter. The contract is clear. Contracts are for business, honey. Hearts don't read fine print." Before Iris could respond, Cordelia reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "He asked me to give this to you. Said it was a thank you gift for everything." Iris stared at the box like it might explode. "I can't accept. Just look at it, then decide." With trembling fingers, Iris opened the velvet lid. Inside lay a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a tiny compass, its needle pointing north. Engraved on the back were 2 words, "Find home." Her breath caught. During one of their rare conversations last spring, she had mentioned her childhood dream of traveling the world with nothing but a compass and a backpack. She'd been 12, she'd told him, when her father gave her a toy compass and said that home wasn't a place. It was wherever your heart felt safe. She had never imagined he was listening, really listening. "He remembered," she whispered. "He remembers everything, sweetheart. The way you organize the spice rack alphabetically, how you only eat the green Skittles, that you check on the rosebush every morning because it reminds you of your grandmother." Cordelia's voice softened. "That man has been memorizing you for a year, thinking he'd never get the chance to love you properly." Iris closed the box with a sharp click, her armor of rationality cracking. "It's too late. I already signed the papers." "Papers can be unsigned, child. But regret? That's permanent." After Cordelia left, Iris continued packing with mechanical precision, but her mind kept drifting to moments she'd tried to forget. Mike bringing her soup when she had the flu, claiming Cordelia made extra. Mike switching to decaf coffee, because he'd noticed she seemed anxious after their morning encounters. Mike working late in his study with the door cracked open, as if hoping she might interrupt. She was folding her last sweater when she heard it, the low rumble of his Tesla in the driveway. Her heart stuttered. He was home early. Footsteps echoed up the marble staircase, stopping outside her door. A long pause. Then so quietly she almost missed it. "Iris, are you in there?" She froze, sweater clutched to her chest. "I know you're leaving tomorrow," he continued, his voice muffled by the heavy oak door. I wanted to say thank you for keeping your end of the bargain, for making this year bearable, for being," another pause, longer this time, "for being the best thing that ever happened to this empty house." She heard him sigh, heard his footsteps retreating down the hall. The door to his study closed with a soft click. Iris sank onto her bed, the compass necklace warm in her palm. Through the walls, she could hear the faint sound of classical music. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece she had hummed while cooking dinner last month, not knowing he was listening from the doorway. He was playing it for her, a goodbye wrapped in melody. She looked at her packed boxes, at the divorce papers on her dresser, at the compass pointing toward a future that suddenly felt less like freedom and more like exile. Tomorrow, she would walk out of this house and back into her real life. Tomorrow, she would pretend that living in the same space as Mike Johnson had been nothing more than a business transaction. But tonight, with Chopin drifting through the walls and a compass burning against her palm, Iris wondered if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The music stopped abruptly, leaving only silence and the terrifying possibility that some goodbyes were meant to be fought against. She wasn't supposed to see him cry. At 2:17 a.m., Iris crept downstairs for water, moving like a ghost through the darkened mansion. The marble floors were cold against her bare feet, and moonlight painted silver rectangles across the hallway walls. She had given up on sleep hours ago, her mind spinning between Cordelia's words and the weight of the compass necklace on her nightstand. The kitchen was bathed in shadows when she heard it, a sound so raw and broken it stopped her dead in her tracks. Through the partially open study door, she could see Mike hunched over his mahogany desk, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his white dress shirt wrinkled and unbuttoned at the collar. Empty whiskey tumbler sat beside scattered papers, and in the amber glow of the desk lamp he looked utterly, devastatingly human. In his hands, he held something small and white, a photograph. Iris pressed herself against the wall, knowing she should leave, knowing this was a private moment she had no right to witness. But something in his broken posture held her captive. "I'm such an idiot," Mike whispered to the empty room, his voice thick with alcohol and regret. 364 days and I never told her, not once. He set the photograph down gently, and Iris's breath caught. Even from the doorway she could see what it was. A candid shot of her from last Christmas morning, laughing at something Damon had said during their video call. Her smile was genuine, unguarded, beautiful. She remembered that moment. Mike had been in the kitchen allegedly making coffee, but she'd caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Now she knew. He had been memorizing her joy. "She probably thinks I don't care," he continued, running his fingers through his hair. "God, the way she looks at me sometimes, like she's waiting for me to remember she exists. And I," his voice cracked, "I remember everything. Every laugh, every frown, every time she hums that song while making dinner." Iris's heart clenched. The song was La Vie en Rose, her grandmother's favorite. She hadn't realized anyone was listening. Mike picked up another paper from his desk, their marriage certificate, she realized with a start. His thumb traced over her signature like it was sacred text. "I thought I was protecting her," he whispered, "keeping my distance, honoring the contract, being a gentleman." He laughed bitterly. "But gentlemen don't fall in love with their contract wives, do they? Gentlemen don't lie awake at night listening for footsteps in the hallway, hoping she might knock on their door." A sob escaped Iris's throat before she could stop it. Mike's head snapped up, his eyes finding hers through the darkness. They stared at each other across the space between the hallway and his study, two people who had spent a year perfecting the art of emotional distance, now stripped bare by moonlight and honesty. "Iris," his voice was hoarse, vulnerable. "How long have you been standing there?" She stepped into the doorway, her silk pajamas ghostly in the lamplight. "Long enough." Mike stood slowly, swaying slightly from the whiskey. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usual composure completely shattered. "I'm sorry. You weren't supposed to. I didn't mean for you to see me like this." "Like what? Human?" The words came out sharper than she intended, years of careful control cracking under the weight of witnessing his pain. "Like a man who's about to lose the only woman who ever made him want to be better than he is." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Iris wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that she was standing in a millionaire's study at 2 in the morning, having a conversation that could change everything or destroy what little they had left. "Mike," she began, but he held up a hand. "Don't, please." He moved to the window, putting distance between them. "I know what you're going to say. The contract was clear. No emotional complications. No crossing lines. I broke the rules and I'm sorry. You're sorry for having feelings. I'm sorry for making you uncomfortable, for putting you in an impossible position." He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw a pain that mirrored her own. "You deserve better than a man who falls in love with someone he's supposed to be protecting, someone who's supposed to be temporary." The word temporary hit her like a physical blow. Is that all she had been to him? A brief interruption in his carefully planned life? But then she looked at the photograph on his desk, at the marriage certificate he'd been holding like a lifeline, at the man who had spent a year learning her favorite song without ever letting on that he was listening. What if I don't want better? The words escaped before her rational mind could stop them. What if I want the man who remembers that I hate yellow roses but love white ones? Who switched to decaf because he noticed caffeine makes me anxious? Who plays Chopin at midnight because he knows I can hear it through the walls? Mike's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring across his features. Iris, don't say things you don't mean. Not tonight. Not when I'm already... I mean every word. She took a step closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. I've been falling in love with you for months, Mike. Fighting it, denying it, pretending it was just gratitude or proximity or anything except what it really was. The grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, marking time in a moment that felt suspended between heartbeats. Mike reached for her, then stopped himself, his hand hovering in the space between them like a question mark. The contract expires in 18 hours, he whispered. I know. After that, you'll be free. No obligations, no strings attached. You can have any life you want. Iris looked at this brilliant, vulnerable man who had been brave enough to marry a stranger to save her family, generous enough to give her space to heal, and foolish enough to fall in love despite every reason not to. And what if the life I want includes you? The question shattered something in Mike's carefully constructed walls. He closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, his hands cupping her face like she was made of spun glass. Then we're both in trouble, he breathed against her forehead. Outside, Boston slept on, unaware that in a Beacon Hill mansion, 2 people were finally brave enough to admit that some contracts were meant to be rewritten by the heart. The coffee was burning, and Iris couldn't bring herself to care. She stood at the kitchen counter at 6:30 a.m., watching steam rise from the forgotten pot, while her mind replayed every word, every touch, every heartbeat from the night before. Mike's hands on her face, his whispered confession, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and impossible. Then reality had crashed back in. The contract, the complications, the fact that in 12 hours she was supposed to walk out of his life forever. She had pulled away first, mumbling something about needing time to think, and fled upstairs like a coward. Now in the harsh light of morning, last night felt like a fever dream. The sound of footsteps on marble made her freeze. Mike appeared in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept either. His usually perfect hair was mussed, his dress shirt replaced by a simple white t-shirt and jeans, the most casual she'd ever seen him. But it was his eyes that undid her completely. They held the same raw vulnerability from the night before, mixed with something that looked dangerously like hope. Morning, he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. I burned the coffee. It was a stupid thing to say, but her brain had apparently forgotten how to form coherent thoughts around him. I noticed. Mike moved to the cabinet, pulling out a fresh filter. I'll make a new pot. They moved around each other in the kitchen like dancers who knew the choreography by heart, but everything felt different now, charged. When he reached past her for the coffee grounds, his arm brushed hers, and she felt the contact like electricity. Iris, he began, then stopped, started again. About last night, you were drunk. The words came out sharper than she intended, a defense mechanism she couldn't control. Mike's hand stilled on the coffee canister. I was. But that doesn't make anything I said less true. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from her brother. Picking you up at 6 p.m. as planned. Can't wait to have my sister back home. The message hit her like cold water. Damon, her real life. The tiny apartment in Jamaica Plain where she belonged. Not this marble palace where she'd been playing house with a man who made her forget every rule she'd ever made about protecting her heart. Mike glanced at the phone screen, his jaw tightening. Damon's coming to get you. Yes. She couldn't look at him. The movers come tomorrow for my things. Right, of course. He busied himself with the coffee maker, his movements sharp and efficient. Back to your real life. The phrase stung because it implied this, whatever this was, had never been real at all. Mike, don't. He turned to face her, and she was startled by the pain in his eyes. Please don't apologize for having feelings last night. Don't minimize what happened between us just because daylight makes it seem complicated. It is complicated. Everything worth having is complicated, Iris. Before she could respond, Cordelia bustled into the kitchen, carrying a basket of fresh laundry. She took one look at their faces and set the basket down with unnecessary force. Oh, for heaven's sake, she muttered. You two are going to drive me to an early grave. Cordelia, Mike started. Don't Cordelia me, young man. I've been watching this dance for a year and I'm tired of it. She fixed them both with a stern look. Miss Iris, do you love him? Iris's cheeks flamed. That's not... We can't just... It's a yes or no question, child. The kitchen fell silent, except for the gentle bubbling of the coffee maker. Mike watched her with an intensity that made her feel transparent, like he could see straight through to her soul. Yes, Iris whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside her. God help me, yes. Cordelia turned to Mike. And you, Mr. Johnson, do you love her? More than I've ever loved anything in my life. His answer came without hesitation, steady and sure. Well then, Cordelia dusted her hands off like she'd just solved world hunger. Seems to me the only complication here is two stubborn people who think love has to follow a business plan. She picked up her laundry basket and headed for the door, then paused. By the way, Miss Iris, that young man of yours called yesterday while you were out. Damon, sweet boy, told me he's worried about you leaving here because, and I quote, Iris has never looked as happy as she does in the photos she sends me from that house. The words hit Iris like a physical blow. She had been happy here, happier than she'd been since before her parents died, since before medical bills and survival became her primary concerns. She'd been so focused on protecting herself from potential heartbreak that she'd forgotten what it felt like to actually live. Cordelia left them alone with the truth hanging in the air like incense. Mike poured 2 cups of coffee, adding honey to hers without asking, another small intimacy that spoke of a year's worth of careful attention. He slid the mug across the marble counter, their fingers brushing as she accepted it. I have a proposition, he said quietly. Iris's heart stuttered. Mike, not a contract this time, something else entirely. He took a sip of his coffee, gathering courage. Stay for 1 more day. Not as my contract wife, not because of any legal obligation. Stay because you want to see what we could be if we stopped being afraid. And if it doesn't work, then you leave with no regrets, knowing we tried. And if it does work, he set down his mug and stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Then maybe we rewrite the ending. Through the kitchen window, Boston was waking up. Traffic hummed in the distance, people hurrying to jobs and appointments and ordinary lives. But in this marble kitchen, with morning light painting everything golden, Iris felt like she stood at the edge of something extraordinary. She thought about Damon's text, about her packed boxes upstairs, about the divorce papers sitting on her dresser like a death sentence for something that had never been allowed to truly live. 1 more day, she said, and watched hope bloom across Mike's face like sunrise. But as she said it, a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered the question that would haunt her for the next 24 hours. What happened when 1 more day turned into forever, and forever turned into the kind of heartbreak she'd spent her whole life trying to avoid? He asked her to forget the world existed for 24 hours, and she said yes. At 10 a.m., Mike did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called his assistant and cancelled every meeting, every conference call, every obligation that tied him to the empire he'd built. Then he found Iris in the garden, tending to the white roses she'd planted last spring, and asked her the question that would change everything. What would you do if this was your last day on Earth? She looked up from the blooms, dirt smudged on her cheek, sunlight catching the gold undertones in her dark skin. What kind of question is that? The kind that matters. He knelt beside her in the garden bed, not caring that his jeans would be ruined. I've spent a year watching you live like you're afraid to take up too much space. Today, I want to see what happens when you stop apologizing for existing. Iris sat back on her heels, studying his face. You're serious. Dead serious. 1 day, Iris. No contracts, no expectations, no thinking about tomorrow. Just us, figuring out who we are when we're not pretending to be strangers. She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then slowly a smile spread across her face. Not the polite, controlled expression he'd grown accustomed to, but something wild and genuine that made his chest tight. I'd want to eat breakfast for dinner, she said. Pancakes with real maple syrup, the expensive kind. Done. What else? I'd want to dance. Not at some fancy gala, but barefoot in the living room, with music so loud the neighbors complain. Mike grinned. Consider it arranged. Keep going. I'd want to tell someone I love them without being afraid they'll leave. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and he knew she was talking about more than hypotheticals. Then tell me, he said simply. The words hung between them like a dare. Iris reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with the kind of reverence reserved for precious things. I love you, Mike Johnson. I love your terrible dad jokes during breakfast. I love how you read the financial news out loud because you think I'm not interested, but really you just like sharing your world with me. I love that you remember my favorite flowers and my brother's birthday, and the fact that I hum when I'm nervous. Her voice broke slightly. I love you so much, it terrifies me. Mike caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest, where his heart was racing. Good. I was starting to think I was the only one who was scared out of their mind. What followed was the kind of day that existed outside normal time, painted in moments so perfect they felt stolen from someone else's life. They made pancakes at noon, Iris teaching him her grandmother's secret recipe, while flour dusted their clothes and laughter filled the kitchen. Mike was terrible at flipping them, sending half the batter onto the floor, but Iris just laughed and kissed powdered sugar from his lips like it was the most natural thing in the world. They drove to Fenway Park in his Tesla, eating hot dogs and arguing about baseball statistics like an old married couple. Iris confessed she'd never been to a game before. Her family couldn't afford it growing up, and Mike made a mental note to buy season tickets just in case they had more tomorrows to fill. In the afternoon, they walked through the public garden, feeding ducks by the pond while Mike told her stories about his childhood she'd never heard, how his father had been absent, buried in work, how he'd built his hotel empire partly to prove he could be different, could be present for the people who mattered. "Is that why you never wanted to get married for real?" Iris asked, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. "Because you were afraid you'd turn into him?" "Partly." Mike stopped walking, turning to face her on the bridge overlooking the water. "But mostly because I never met anyone who made me want to try. Until you." As evening approached, they returned home to find Cordelia had left early, giving them the kind of privacy they'd never had before. Mike ordered takeout from Iris's favorite Thai restaurant, the one she'd mentioned loving but could never afford, and they ate on the floor of the living room, sharing pad thai straight from the container. Then Mike did something that nearly broke her heart. He went to his study and returned with a small Bluetooth speaker, setting it on the coffee table with careful ceremony. "You said you wanted to dance," he said, extending his hand. The first song was La Vie en Rose, the one she hummed without thinking, the one that reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen and Sunday mornings, before the world got complicated. Mike pulled her close and they swayed in the lamplight. No technique, no performance, just two people holding each other like they were the only solid things in a shifting world. "I can't dance," Iris whispered against his chest. "Neither can I." His breath was warm against her hair. "We'll figure it out as we go." They danced through 4 songs, then 5, then lost count entirely. Iris's head found the perfect spot on Mike's shoulder, and she thought about how dangerous this was, this feeling of fitting together like puzzle pieces that had been separated by accident. When the music finally stopped, they didn't let go. They stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped around each other, listening to the grandfather clock mark time they didn't want to lose. "Mike?" Iris's voice was muffled against his shirt. "Yeah, I'm still scared." His arms tightened around her. "So am I, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." She pulled back to look at him, this man who had somehow become her home when she wasn't paying attention. His hair was mussed from dancing, his eyes soft with something that looked like forever. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to find out without you." Outside, Boston settled into night, unaware that in a Beacon Hill mansion, 2 people had just discovered that love wasn't about contracts or safety nets or guarantees. Sometimes, love was about dancing barefoot in your living room and hoping the music never stopped. But as Iris looked into Mike's eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the distance, she could hear the final song beginning to play. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m., shattering their perfect world like glass. Iris felt Mike's body tense against hers, where they lay curled together on the living room sofa, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. They had been existing in a bubble of stolen time, watching the sun set through the bay windows while planning a future neither of them was sure they deserved. "That's Damon," she whispered, though neither of them moved to answer the door. The bell rang again, followed by enthusiastic knocking. Through the frosted glass panels, Iris could see her brother's familiar silhouette, probably bouncing on his toes the way he did when he was excited. "Iris!" Damon's voice carried through the heavy oak door. "Come on, sis. I know you're in there. I brought the car around. Time to blow this fancy popsicle stand." Mike's chest rose and fell beneath her cheek, his heartbeat quickening. "You could pretend you're not here," he said quietly, but they both knew it was impossible. Damon would probably camp on the doorstep until morning. "I have to face this." Iris sat up, immediately missing the warmth of Mike's embrace. He's been looking forward to this all week. She smoothed her hair and walked to the front door, aware that Mike followed a few steps behind. When she opened it, Damon practically bounced through the threshold, his arms already outstretched for a hug, At 24, her brother had inherited their father's infectious smile and their mother's stubborn optimism. 6 months of chemotherapy had left him thinner than she remembered, but his eyes sparkled with the same mischief that had gotten them both in trouble as kids. "Freedom," he declared, spinning her around in the foyer. "My sister is finally getting out of this business arrangement and back to her real life. No more playing house with Mr. Moneybags." Iris felt Mike flinch behind her, though his expression remained carefully neutral when Damon turned to acknowledge him. "Johnson." Damon extended his hand with polite formality. "Thanks for taking care of Iris this year. I know it was just business, but the financial help meant everything to our family." "It was my pleasure," Mike replied, his voice steady despite the pain Iris could see flickering in his eyes. "Your sister is exceptional." Damon grinned, completely oblivious to the undercurrent swirling around him. "Tell me something I don't know. She's been looking out for everyone else since she was 15. Time she got to focus on herself for once." He turned back to Iris, his expression softening. "I packed up most of your stuff from the old apartment yesterday. It's all waiting for you. Mrs. Henley from 3B made that casserole you like, and Tommy from the corner store saved you a bottle of that fancy wine you bought once for New Year's." Each word felt like a small knife to Iris's chest. Her real life, the one she'd built before Mike Johnson, and marble countertops and dancing barefoot to French songs. It was still there, waiting for her return, like she'd never left. That's wonderful," she managed, her voice sounding hollow even to herself. "Oh, and I've got news." Damon's excitement was palpable. "Remember that marketing firm downtown, Hendricks and Associates? They called yesterday. They want to interview you for that senior position you applied for months ago. Apparently, one of their biggest clients specifically requested you after seeing your work on social media." Iris's stomach dropped. She had forgotten about that application entirely, sent during a moment of desperation when Damon's medical bills were piling up faster than she could manage. "When?" she asked weakly. "Monday morning. Can you believe it? Perfect timing, right? Like the universe knew you'd be ready for a fresh start." Damon squeezed her hands. "Iris, this is it. This is your chance to build the career you always wanted, without having to worry about my medical expenses anymore." Mike cleared his throat softly. "Congratulations. That sounds like an incredible opportunity." There was no bitterness in his voice, no resentment, just genuine happiness for her success, which somehow made everything worse. This was the man she loved, standing in his foyer, graciously celebrating the job that would take her away from him forever. "I should get my things," Iris said numbly. "Already handled." Damon pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of her packed boxes stacked neatly in his Honda Civic. "Cordelia helped me load everything up, sweet lady." She seemed a little sad, though, kept muttering something about stubborn fools and wasted chances. Of course, Cordelia had known this moment would come. The housekeeper had probably watched a dozen business arrangements end exactly like this, with polite handshakes and careful distances, and hearts breaking in silence. Mike stepped forward, and for a moment Iris thought he might fight for her, might tell Damon about the night before, about dancing in the living room, about love confessions in Morning Gardens. Instead, he simply said, "Let me walk you to the car." The three of them moved through the house in procession, past the kitchen where they'd made pancakes, past the living room where they'd discovered what it felt like to fit together perfectly. Each room held memories that would have to last a lifetime. At the front door, Mike handed Iris a small envelope. "Your final payment, as agreed in the contract, plus a little extra for going above and beyond." The words were professional, businesslike, but when their fingers touched as she accepted the envelope, his thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it nearly brought her to her knees. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of everything they couldn't say in front of Damon. "Thank you," he replied, and she knew he wasn't talking about the contract either. Damon was already heading toward the car, chattering about apartment hunting and job interviews and all the ordinary adventures waiting for them. But Iris lingered on the threshold, memorizing Mike's face in the porch light. "Iris?" Damon called from the driveway. "Are you coming?" She looked at Mike one last time, at this man who had given her a year of safety, a day of perfect love, and now the grace to leave without making it harder than it already was. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." And then she was walking away from the only home she'd ever truly known, toward a future that felt like freedom and exile all at once. As Damon's car pulled away from the curb, Iris turned back to see Mike still standing in the doorway, watching her disappear into the night. Neither of them waved goodbye. Some farewells were too heartbreaking for gestures. 3 days in her old life, and Iris already felt like she was drowning in beige. The studio apartment in Jamaica Plain that had once felt cozy now seemed suffocating. 400 square feet of carefully arranged furniture and second-hand dreams. She sat on her lumpy futon at 2 a.m., staring at the job offer from Hendricks and Associates, spread across her coffee table like evidence of a life she no longer wanted. Senior marketing strategist, $68,000 a year, health benefits, 2 weeks paid vacation. Everything she'd thought she wanted before she learned what it felt like to wake up in a marble palace next to a man who looked at her like she hung the stars. Her phone buzzed. "A text from Damon. Can't sleep either? Excited about your interview tomorrow?" She typed back, something like that. But excitement wasn't the word for the sick feeling in her stomach every time she thought about sitting in a conference room, pretending to care about quarterly projections and market demographics, when all she really wanted was to hear Mike's terrible dad jokes over morning coffee. The apartment felt too quiet without the gentle hum of the mansion's central air, without the distant sound of Mike moving around in his study late at night. Even the traffic noise from Center Street seemed muted compared to the vibrant silence she'd grown accustomed to. Iris picked up the compass necklace from her nightstand, running her thumb over the engraved words, "Find home." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her whole life searching for stability, for safety, for a place where she belonged, and when she'd finally found it, she'd walked away because it scared her. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. She almost ignored it, probably another congratulatory message from a distant relative who'd heard about her big opportunity, but something made her click it open. The sender made her heart stop. JohnsonAluxeHotelGroup.com. Subject, "Thank you." Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Iris, I know I have no right to contact you, but I needed you to know something. This morning I received a call from the Children's Hospital of Boston. The anonymous donation I made last year in your name has funded a new wing for pediatric cancer treatment. They're calling it the Malone Family Center. I thought you should know that your brother won't be the only one whose life was saved by your sacrifice. The year you gave me, the strength you showed, the way you turned a business arrangement into something that mattered, it's going to help other families like yours for generations. I also thought you should know that I've been a coward. For 365 days, I told myself I was protecting you by keeping my distance. I convinced myself that loving you quietly was noble, that respecting the boundaries of our contract made me honorable. But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared that you'd realize you deserved better than a man who built walls instead of bridges. Scared that if I reached for you, you'd disappear. Scared that love was just another business transaction I'd inevitably mess up. I was wrong about everything. You don't deserve better than me, Iris. You deserve exactly what you've always deserved. Someone brave enough to fight for you. Someone who sees your worth and refuses to let you settle for less than extraordinary. I should have been that someone. I should have torn up those divorce papers the moment you left them on my desk. I should have chased your brother's car down Marlborough Street. I should have shown up at your apartment with white roses and that terrible poetry I used to write in college, demanding that you give us a real chance. Instead, I let you walk away because I thought it was what you wanted. But I'm done being noble. I'm done being respectful. I'm done pretending that what we had was just a contract when it was the realest thing I've ever experienced. So here's my proposition. Don't take the job. Come back to me. Not as my contract wife, not because of any legal obligation, but because you want to build something real with a man who loves you so desperately, he can't sleep, can't eat, can't breathe, without wondering what you're doing every moment of every day. I'm offering you partnership in every sense of the word. In my business, in my heart, in a life we designed together from scratch. I'm offering you white roses every Friday, terrible pancakes every Sunday, and dancing in the living room whenever you hum that French song. I'm offering you forever, Iris. Not the safe, predictable forever you could have with someone else, but the messy, complicated, absolutely extraordinary forever we could have together. If that's not what you want, I'll respect your decision. I'll stop being a coward long enough to let you go completely. But if there's any part of you that misses waking up in our house, drinking coffee from our mugs, living the life we accidentally built together, then please, come home. All my love, Mike P.S. I kept your rosebush, just in case. Iris read the email 3 times before the words fully sank in. Then she laughed, a sound caught between hysteria and hope. The Malone Family Center. He had named a hospital wing after her family. The man who claimed to be a coward had quietly arranged for her brother's struggle to save other children. She looked around her tiny apartment, at the life she'd built out of necessity rather than choice, at the job offer that represented security but not joy, at the carefully controlled existence she'd returned to because it felt safe. Then she looked at the compass necklace, still pointing north toward whatever home was supposed to be. Her phone rang, startling her. The caller ID showed Damon's name. "Hey," she answered, her voice shaky. "Iris, are you crying? Maybe a little. What's wrong? Are you nervous about tomorrow? Because you're going to crush that interview. You're the smartest person I know. And, Damon," she interrupted him gently, "what if I don't want the job?" Silence. Then, "What do you mean? What if I'm not ready to come back to this life? What if I found something better and I was too scared to fight for it?" Another pause. When Damon spoke again, his voice was softer, more serious than she'd heard it in years. "Iris, are you talking about Mike?" The question hung in the air like a bridge she could either cross or burn. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I am." "Then what the hell are you doing sitting in that apartment? Go get him." "But the job, your medical bills, everything we planned." "Sis." Damon's voice was firm. "I've been watching you sacrifice your happiness for other people since you were 15 years old. The medical bills are handled, thanks to your year of playing house with Mr. Moneybags. For the first time in forever, you get to choose what you want. Not what's practical, not what's safe, but what makes you happy." He paused. "And I haven't seen you smile, really smile, since you came back home." Iris closed her eyes, feeling something shift inside her chest. Something that felt dangerously like courage. What if it doesn't work out? Then you'll figure it out like you always do. But Iris, what if it does? After she hung up, Iris sat in the silence of her apartment for exactly 3 minutes. Then she opened her laptop and typed a response that would change everything. "Mike, I'm coming home. Wait for me. Love, Iris." She hit send before she could change her mind, then started throwing clothes into a suitcase. Some chances were too important to wait for morning. At 3:47 a.m., Iris stood outside the mansion that used to be her home and realized she had no idea how to knock on her own door. The Uber driver had given her strange looks during the 40-minute ride from Jamaica Plain to Beacon Hill, probably wondering why anyone would be traveling across the city with a hastily packed suitcase at this ungodly hour. But Iris couldn't wait until morning. Couldn't spend another second in that suffocating apartment when Mike's words were burning in her chest like a promise she was finally brave enough to keep. The house loomed before her in the pre-dawn darkness, its Georgian architecture elegant even in shadow. Every window was dark except one, the warm glow emanating from Mike's study on the second floor. Of course he was awake, probably pacing, probably wondering if she'd even read his email, probably preparing himself for rejection. She climbed the front steps on unsteady legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. The spare key was still hidden under the third flower pot on the left. She'd helped Cordelia water those geraniums 100 times. Her fingers trembled as she retrieved it, the cool metal familiar against her palm. The front door opened with the same soft whisper it always had, and she stepped into the marble foyer that smelled like lemon polish and expensive candles and home. Everything was exactly as she'd left it 3 days ago, but somehow it felt different, charged with possibility. She set her suitcase down carefully, not wanting to wake anyone, though she suspected Cordelia slept like the dead, and Mike was probably too lost in his own thoughts to notice anything short of an earthquake. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times, and as if summoned by the sound, she heard footsteps on the stairs above. Slow, heavy, defeated footsteps that belonged to a man who'd been pacing all night. Mike appeared at the top of the staircase in pajama pants and a wrinkled t-shirt, his hair sticking up at odd angles. He stopped dead when he saw her, his hand gripping the banister like it was the only thing keeping him upright. They stared at each other across the foyer, two people who'd spent a year perfecting the art of careful distance, now raw and exposed in the early morning darkness. "Shayu came back," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and something that sounded dangerously like hope. "You asked me to." She took a step forward, then another, drawn by the magnetic pull that had been building between them for months. "The Malone family center, Mike? Really?" A flush crept up his neck. "Your brother's recovery inspired me. I thought if other families could avoid what you went through—" "You beautiful, ridiculous man." She was crying now, happy tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "Do you have any idea what that means to me?" Mike descended the stairs slowly, like he was afraid sudden movements might scare her away. "I was hoping it might mean you'd forgive me for being a coward for so long." "There's nothing to forgive." She met him at the bottom of the staircase, close enough to touch, but still maintaining that invisible boundary they'd lived with for so long. We were both scared. And now, Iris looked at this man who'd written her an email that read like a love letter, who'd named a hospital wing after her family, who'd kept her rosebush watered in case she came home. This man who made terrible jokes and perfect coffee and had taught her that love didn't have to be a business transaction. Now I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to try. Mike reached for her then, his hands cupping her face with the same reverence he'd shown 3 nights ago in his study. I love you, Iris Malone, not because of any contract, not because of any arrangement, but because you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you. You already are that man, she whispered against his palms. You always were. I just needed to stop being afraid long enough to see it. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of a year's worth of restraint finally breaking free. It was their second kiss, but it felt like the first one that mattered, the first one without contracts or complications or careful boundaries. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Mike rested his forehead against hers. So, what happens now? He asked. Now we figure it out as we go, she said, echoing his words from their night of dancing. No contracts this time. Just us building something real. I can live with that. His smile was brighter than sunrise, although I should probably mention that Cordelia's been leaving passive-aggressive notes around the house about stubborn fools who don't know a good thing when they see it. She's going to be insufferably smug when she finds out you're back. Iris laughed, the sound echoing through the marble foyer like music. Speaking of which, I should call Damon. Let him know I'm not making it to that interview. About that, Mike looked suddenly nervous. I may have already called Hendricks and Associates and offered to buy out your contract if they'd consider you for a remote consulting position instead. You know, just in case you decided to come back. She stared at him, torn between laughter and exasperation. Mike Johnson, did you just try to manipulate my career prospects? Possibly. He had the grace to look sheepish. In my defense, I was desperate and possibly not thinking clearly. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? Absolutely. He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips again because he could, because she was here, because they had tomorrow and the day after that to figure out how to love each other properly. But I'm hoping I'm your kind of trouble. As the first rays of dawn began filtering through the tall windows, painting the foyer in shades of gold and rose, Iris realized she was exactly where she belonged, not because a contract said so, not because circumstances had forced her here, but because she'd chosen it. She'd chosen him, they'd chosen each other. Come on, she said, taking his hand and leading him toward the kitchen. Let's make coffee. The real kind this time, not the burnt disaster I was making while having emotional breakdowns. I loved your burnt coffee, Mike protested, following her through the house that was no longer his alone. It was perfectly imperfect, like us. Speak for yourself, Iris called over her shoulder. I intend to be flawlessly perfect from now on. Mike's laughter followed her into the kitchen, warm and rich and full of promise. Good luck with that, Mrs. Johnson. The words stopped her cold. Mrs. Johnson, not because of a contract this time, but because... Mike, she said slowly, turning to face him. Are you proposing to me? His eyes widened. Not yet. But someday if you want, maybe we could discuss the possibility of... She silenced him with a kiss that tasted like coffee and promises and the beginning of forever. Some conversations, she decided, were better saved for after sunrise. She found the divorce papers at exactly 7 a.m., and everything changed. Iris had woken up in Mike's arms for the first time in her life, sunlight streaming through his bedroom windows, her head tucked perfectly against his shoulder. They'd fallen asleep on his couch after talking until dawn, but sometime during the early morning hours, he'd carried her upstairs and they'd collapsed together on his king-sized bed, like teenagers after prom. Now padding barefoot through the house in one of his Harvard t-shirts, she'd gone to her old room to retrieve something from her jewelry box when she saw them. The divorce papers she'd left on the desk 3 days ago were still there, but they weren't alone. Beside them lay a thick manila folder she'd never seen before, with her name written across the front in Mike's careful handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were copies of every document related to their marriage contract, but these weren't the sterile legal papers she remembered signing. These were covered in Mike's handwritten notes, observations, comments, scribbled in the margins like he'd been studying her life for a year. Iris prefers chamomile tea when stressed. Stock kitchen accordingly. Note, she hums Edith Piaf when content. Make playlist. Medical bills for Damon total $247,000. Increase monthly allowance. Iris won't accept direct gifts, but donates anonymously to animal shelter every month. Set up matching fund. Page after page of notes, documenting not just the legal requirements of their arrangement, but the human details that had made her who she was. Evidence of a man who'd been falling in love in meticulous, careful increments, but it was the final document that made her knees buckle. A letter dated 6 months ago, addressed to his attorney. James, please draft a revised marriage contract to supersede our current arrangement. The new terms should include 1. Iris Malone will be granted full partnership in Lux Hotel Group 2. All medical expenses for her brother Damon will be covered in perpetuity. 3. The Beacon Hill property will be transferred to joint ownership. 4. A trust fund of $2 million will be established for her personal use. 5. The marriage will continue indefinitely, with the option to dissolve only by mutual agreement. I understand this deviates significantly from our original business arrangement, but circumstances have changed. I've changed. Iris deserves security that doesn't depend on my continued goodwill or the whims of a contract with an expiration date. She deserves to be an equal partner in a life we build together, not a temporary employee in mine. I haven't presented this to her yet, because I'm still trying to find the courage to admit that our business arrangement stopped being business for me around day 30. Please prepare the documents. I'll find a way to bring it up when the time is right. Regards, Michael Johnson. Iris sank into the desk chair, her legs no longer capable of supporting her. 6 months ago. He'd been planning to rewrite their entire arrangement 6 months ago, not because the contract demanded it, but because he'd wanted to give her everything, and she'd signed divorce papers and walked away before he could find the courage to tell her. Iris? Mike's voice carried up the stairs, warm and sleep-rough. Coffee's ready if you want. His words died as he appeared in the doorway and saw her sitting at the desk, surrounded by the evidence of his year-long love affair with the idea of forever. You weren't supposed to find those, he said quietly, his face cycling through embarrassment, panic, and resignation. 6 months ago, her voice came out as a whisper. You wanted to tear up our contract 6 months ago. I wanted to do a lot of things 6 months ago. He leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking every one of his 36 years. I wanted to tell you I loved you. I wanted to ask if you might consider staying past our expiration date. I wanted to find out if what I saw in your eyes sometimes was real or just wishful thinking on my part. Why didn't you? Mike ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. Because you were so careful around me, so polite, so professional. I convinced myself you were counting down the days until you could leave, and the last thing you needed was your contract husband making things complicated with feelings. Iris stood up, the folder clutched against her chest. You thought I wanted to leave, didn't you? His smile was sad, self-deprecating. You had your life planned out, Iris. Career goals, independence, freedom from the medical debt that brought you here in the first place. I was just the bridge between your old life and your new one. You were never just anything to me. The words came out fierce, almost angry. Do you want to know what I was really counting down? Not days until I could leave. Days until you'd get tired of having me here. Days until you'd remember that I was just the girl you hired to solve a legal problem, not someone worth keeping. Mike stared at her like she'd just told him the sky was purple. Are you serious? I spent a year walking on eggshells, trying not to fall too hard for a man I was sure would eventually ask me to leave. Iris laughed, but there was no humor in it. I was so busy protecting myself from heartbreak that I nearly broke both our hearts instead. We're idiots, Mike said finally, complete idiots. The kind of idiots who waste a year being in love with each other and too scared to admit it. The kind of idiots who need a housekeeper to point out the obvious. Iris looked down at the letter in her hands, at the legal document that would have changed everything if either of them had been brave enough to have one honest conversation. Mike crossed the room slowly, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. For what it's worth, I was going to give you that letter the day after our contract expired. My grand gesture, my desperate attempt to convince you to stay. And I was going to leave those divorce papers and disappear without explanation because I thought it would be easier than watching you pretend to be sad to see me go. We really are disasters as human beings. The worst. Iris reached for the divorce papers on the desk, the ones that had seemed so final 3 days ago. With deliberate precision, she tore them in half, then in half again, and again, until confetti-sized pieces scattered across the Persian rug like snow. Mike watched her destroy their ending with an expression of wonder. "What are you doing?" "Rewriting the story." She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to count the freckles across his nose that she'd memorized from a year of stolen glances. "You want to make me your business partner?" "Among other things." "What other things?" Mike's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones like he was memorizing the geography of her features. "I want to make you my wife. Not contract wife, not temporary wife, but the kind of wife who gets to complain about my terrible taste in movies and steal my favorite sweaters and grow old with me in this house. That's a lot of wants, Mr. Johnson. I'm a greedy man when it comes to you, Miss Malone." Iris rose up on her toes, bringing her lips close enough to his that their breath mingled in the space between intention and action. "Good, because I want all of that, too. Plus a few things you haven't thought of yet, such as babies," she whispered against his mouth. "Tiny humans with your eyes and my stubbornness who'll run through these halls and make this house feel alive." Mike's breath caught. "Iris, too much too fast?" "Not fast enough." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promises they'd both been too afraid to make. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "How many babies are we talking about? Because I should probably start converting bedrooms. Let's start with one and see how we do." "I can work with that." Mike grinned, the expression transforming his entire face. "Although I should warn you, I've never actually been a real husband before. You might have to be patient while I figure out how to do this properly." Iris looked around the room that had been hers for a year, at the evidence of Mike's quiet devotion scattered across the desk, at the man who'd been loving her in secret while she'd been falling for him in plain sight. "I think," she said, taking his hand and leading him toward the door, "we'll figure it out as we go." But as they left her old room behind, walking toward a future they'd finally chosen together, Iris couldn't shake the feeling that their story was about to face one final test. After all, love was easy when it was just the two of them in a marble palace, drinking coffee and making promises. The hard part was keeping those promises when the real world came knocking. The knock on the door came at exactly 9 a.m., shattering their morning like a gunshot through glass. Iris was in the kitchen making actual decent coffee, while Mike read financial reports aloud, not because she cared about quarterly earnings, but because she loved the sound of his voice explaining his world to her. They'd been discussing baby names between stock analyses, laughing about whether their future children would inherit his business acumen or her stubborn streak. Then the doorbell rang, with the kind of persistence that suggested the visitor wasn't going away. "Expecting someone?" Iris asked, but the expression on Mike's face made her stomach drop. "No." His voice was tight, controlled. "But I have a feeling I know who it is." Through the frosted glass panels, they could see the silhouette of a tall, imposing figure. Mike opened the door to reveal a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Hello, Michael." Her voice carried the kind of authority that made boardrooms fall silent. "Aren't you going to invite your mother inside?" Iris felt the world tilt sideways. Mike had mentioned his parents exactly once in their entire year together, to say they were dead to him. Apparently that had been wishful thinking. "Eleanor." Mike's body language had completely changed, his shoulders rigid, his jaw set. "What are you doing here? I heard an interesting rumor that my son has been playing house with some girl for over a year. Imagine my surprise when I discovered it wasn't just idle gossip." Eleanor Johnson stepped into the foyer without invitation, her calculating gaze sweeping over the space before landing on Iris. "And you must be the fortune hunter." The words hit like a slap. Iris felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Mike stepped between them. "Don't." His voice was deadly quiet. "Don't you dare talk to her like that." Eleanor raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Protective, aren't we? How refreshing, though I suppose that's to be expected when someone's been expertly manipulating your emotions for profit. You don't know anything about Iris. I know she married you for money. I know her brother had expensive medical bills. I know she's been living in your house, spending your money, and playing the perfect little wife while positioning herself for the biggest payday of her life." Eleanor's smile was razor sharp. "What I don't know is whether she's told you about the investigator she hired." The world went silent. Iris felt the blood drain from her face as Mike turned to look at her, confusion and the first hint of doubt flickering in his eyes. "What investigator?" His voice was barely a whisper. Iris's throat felt like sandpaper. "Mike, I can explain." "Oh, this is delicious." Eleanor practically purred with satisfaction. She didn't tell you, did she? About hiring a private investigator 6 months ago to dig into your finances, your business dealings, your personal life? About the detailed report she commissioned on your assets and how to position herself for maximum benefit in a divorce? That's not... Iris started, but Eleanor cut her off. I have copies, dear. Very thorough work, though I must say I'm impressed by your patience. Most gold diggers would have made their move much sooner. Mike stared at Iris like he'd never seen her before. Is it true? Did you hire an investigator? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Iris closed her eyes, remembering that terrible week 6 months ago when her own insecurities had gotten the better of her. When she'd convinced herself that Mike was too good to be true, that there had to be some dark secret, some reason why a man like him would want someone like her. Yes, the word came out as a broken whisper, but not for the reasons she's saying. Then why? Mike's voice was hollow, and Iris could hear her heart breaking in the silence that followed. Because I was falling in love with you, and I was terrified. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she forced herself to look at him. Because I couldn't understand why someone like you would want someone like me, and I thought if I knew more about your past, about your life, I could figure out what the catch was. What did you find? Eleanor asked mockingly. Any skeletons in the Johnson family closet? Nothing. Iris's voice grew stronger, clearer. I found nothing but evidence that he was exactly who he appeared to be, a good man who'd built an empire through hard work and integrity, a man who donated anonymously to children's charities, a man who visited his elderly neighbor every Sunday because she was lonely. She turned back to Mike, desperation bleeding through every word. I found proof that you were too good for me, Mike, not the other way around. So I threw the report away and never looked at it again because I realized I didn't want to know your secrets. I wanted you to tell me yourself when you were ready. Mike stood frozen, his face cycling through hurt anger and something that might have been understanding. You investigated me. I did, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. How touching. Eleanor's voice dripped venom. Though I notice you're not denying that you've positioned yourself quite nicely for a divorce settlement. Joint ownership of the house, partnership in the business, very clever negotiating for someone who claims to love him. I never asked for any of that. Iris's composure finally snapped. I signed a contract for 1 year of marriage and medical coverage for my brother. Everything else was Mike's idea, Mike's choice, Mike's generosity that I never deserved. Iris. Mike's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Look at me. She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see disgust, betrayal, the end of everything they'd built. Instead, she saw something else entirely. Do you love me? He asked simply. More than my own life. Do you want my money? I want you. Just you. Poor, rich, or somewhere in between. I want the man who makes terrible pancakes and plays Chopin when he thinks I can't hear him and remembers that I hate yellow roses. Mike nodded slowly, then turned to face his mother. Get out. Eleanor blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct response. Excuse me? You heard me. Get out of my house and don't come back. Michael, I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. The only mistake I made was believing you were dead. Mike's voice was steel wrapped in silk. You want to talk about fortune hunters. You married my father for his money, spent 30 years making his life miserable, and tried to cut me out of the family business when he died because you couldn't control me. He stepped closer to Eleanor, and Iris could see where he'd learned to command boardrooms. Iris hired an investigator because she was insecure and afraid. You hired 3 of them to find dirt on her, and when you couldn't find any, you twisted the truth to try to destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. She's using you. She's loving me. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it. Mike moved to stand beside Iris, taking her hand in his. This woman gave up a year of her life to save her brother. She lived in my house and asked for nothing. She fell in love with me despite every reason not to, and she's brave enough to stay even when people like you try to tear us apart. He squeezed Iris's fingers. She investigated me because she was scared. I would have done the same thing in her position, but the difference is when she found out who I really was, she chose to love me anyway. You found out who she really was, and you chose to hate her for it. Eleanor's face was flushed with fury. You'll regret this, Michael. When she leaves you for someone richer, someone more exciting, you'll remember this conversation. If she leaves me, Mike said calmly, it'll be because I failed to deserve her, not because she was playing some long game for money she never wanted in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor looked between them, her calculated cruelty finally meeting its match in her son's absolute certainty. "This isn't over," she said finally. "Yes, it is." Mike's voice was final. "You're not welcome here, Eleanor. Not now, not ever. Security will escort you out if you come back." After she left, the house felt eerily quiet. Iris and Mike stood in the foyer, hands still clasped, both shaking from the confrontation. "I'm sorry," Iris whispered. "I should have told you about the investigator. You should have trusted me." Mike's voice was gentle, not accusatory. "But I understand why you didn't. I should have told you I loved you 6 months ago instead of leaving you to wonder where you stood. Can you forgive me?" Mike turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to cup her face. "Iris, you hired someone to investigate the man you were falling in love with because you were afraid of getting hurt. I spent a year taking notes on your preferences, like you were a research project, because I was afraid of the same thing. We're both disasters at this. But we're learning. We're learning." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And the next time my toxic family tries to destroy us, we'll face them together, as partners, as equals, as people who chose each other despite every reason not to." Outside, Boston hummed with its usual energy, unaware that in a Beacon Hill mansion, 2 people had just survived their first real test as a couple. They had faced down doubt, manipulation, and the kind of family dysfunction that destroyed most relationships. And they had chosen each other anyway. But as Mike led Iris upstairs to pack away the last remnants of their contract marriage, both of them knew the real test wasn't behind them. It was ahead of them. In every ordinary day they'd spend building a life together without scripts or safety nets or expiration dates. The real test was forever, and for the first time in their lives, they were ready for it. 2 years later, the rosebush had grown wild and beautiful, just like everything else in their life. Iris knelt in the garden on a crisp October morning, her hands gentle among the white blooms that had multiplied beyond her wildest dreams. The morning sickness had finally passed, but she still moved carefully, protective of the small life growing inside her, the baby they'd dreamed about in whispered conversations and planned for with the kind of joy that felt almost too precious to be real. "Mrs. Johnson, you're supposed to be resting," Cordelia's voice carried from the back door, warm with affectionate scolding. "Doctor's orders." Iris smiled without looking up. "It's just a few roses, Cordelia. Besides, they're the only witnesses to the promise I made." She touched her growing belly through her sweater, feeling the flutter of movement that never failed to take her breath away. 4 months along, and she still couldn't quite believe that she and Mike were going to be parents. That the man who'd once been afraid to touch her hand was now reading parenting books and converting the guest room into a nursery with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for business deals. "What promise was that, love?" Mike's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him walking across the lawn with 2 steaming mugs and a smile that still made her heart skip beats. He'd aged beautifully in the past 2 years, laugh lines deeper around his eyes, silver threading through his hair at the temples, the perpetual tension in his shoulders replaced by the kind of contentment that came from being exactly where you belonged. "The promise I made the morning I came back," Iris said, accepting the mug of chamomile tea he offered. "To these roses, to this house, to the life we were going to build together." Mike settled beside her on the garden bench they'd installed last spring, pulling her against his side, with the casual intimacy of 2 people who'd learned that love was both extraordinary and wonderfully ordinary. And what was that promise? That I'd never run away again, that I'd stay and fight for us even when things got scary. She looked at the roses, remembering the girl who'd knelt in this same spot 2 years ago, terrified that love was just another contract waiting to expire. Especially when things got scary. They'd had their share of scary moments. The first real fight about money, Mike wanting to buy her everything, Iris insisting on contributing equally to their life together. The night she'd woken up from a nightmare about Eleanor, convinced that Mike would eventually realize his mother was right about her. The miscarriage scare at 8 weeks that had left them both shaken and grateful and more in love than ever. Each challenge had tested them, shaped them, proven that what they'd built was strong enough to weather whatever came next. "Speaking of scary," Mike said, his tone shifting to something that made Iris look at him sharply. "Damon called this morning." Her brother had become Mike's business partner 6 months ago, bringing his natural charisma and marketing genius to Lux Hotel Group. The 2 men had bonded over their shared devotion to Iris and their mutual love of terrible action movies, creating the kind of family she'd never dared to hope for. "Everything okay?" "More than okay." He wanted to know if we thought the baby would be old enough to be ring bearer at his wedding next summer. Iris's tea mug slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. His what? Mike grinned, catching the mug before it could hit the ground. Apparently he's been hiding a girlfriend for the past 4 months. Keisha, the pediatric nurse from Children's Hospital. He proposed last night at the Malone Family Center, right in front of the plaque with your parents' names on it. Tears sprang to Iris's eyes. Happy tears that seem to come so easily these days. He's getting married. He's getting married. And he specifically requested that the ceremony be held here in this garden, because, and I quote, "This is where Iris learned that love doesn't have to be scary." The words hit her like a wave of pure emotion. She pressed her face against Mike's shoulder, overwhelmed by the beautiful symmetry of it all. Damon, healthy and in love, wanting to start his own forever in the place where hers had begun. "We'll need to expand the garden," she said against his shirt, already called the landscaper, "and hire more caterers than Cordelia can handle on her own." Already on it. "And probably buy a bigger coffee maker, because you know how your business associates get at weddings." "Iris," Mike's voice was gentle, amused, "I've got it handled, all of it. The only thing you need to worry about is whether you want to wear the blue dress or the green one." She pulled back to look at him. This man who'd spent 2 years proving that love could be both passionate and practical, both extraordinary and everyday. "How do you always know exactly what I need?" "Practice. Lots and lots of practice." He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then found her lips in the kind of kiss that still felt like coming home. "Plus, I've had excellent motivation." A car door slammed in the driveway, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps on the front walkway. Iris and Mike exchanged glances. They weren't expecting anyone. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," a young voice called from around the side of the house. "Are you back here?" A moment later, a girl of about 10 appeared at the edge of the garden, practically vibrating with excitement. Lucy Reeves, their next-door neighbor's daughter, who'd appointed herself unofficial guardian of their rosebush and chief source of neighborhood gossip. "Lucy, sweetheart, what's got you so wound up?" Iris asked, automatically shifting into the maternal tone that had been developing alongside her pregnancy hormones. "Mrs. Patterson says to tell you that the mean lady is back," Lucy announced breathlessly. "The one with the silver hair who made you cry last time. She's parked across the street in a fancy car just staring at your house." Iris felt Mike tense beside her, his protective instincts flaring to life. Eleanor had tried 3 more times over the past 2 years to insert herself into their lives, showing up at business functions, sending lawyers with threats about family reputation, even attempting to bribe Cordelia for information about their marriage. Each time Mike had handled her with the same calm finality he'd shown that first day. But Iris knew the encounters still affected him, reminded him of a childhood spent walking on eggshells, around a woman who'd never learned to love without conditions. "It's okay," Iris said, standing carefully and taking his hand. "We knew this might happen when the pregnancy announcement hit the social pages. She has no right, she has no power." Iris squeezed his fingers, feeling their baby flutter, as if sensing the tension. "Not over us, not over this family we've built, not over the life we've chosen together." She looked toward the street, where Eleanor Johnson sat in her Mercedes like a spectre from a life Mike had deliberately left behind. For a moment, Iris felt an echo of her old insecurities, the fear that she wasn't good enough, that love was too fragile to survive this kind of opposition. Then she felt Mike's hand settle protectively over her belly, felt Lucy slip her small fingers into her free hand, heard Cordelia humming in the kitchen as she prepared lunch for the family that had grown around them like roses in fertile soil. "Lucy, honey, would you do me a favor?" Iris asked, her voice steady and sure. "Would you go tell Mrs. Patterson that the mean lady can sit out there as long as she wants, but we're not scared of her anymore?" Lucy nodded solemnly and scampered back toward the neighboring yard, clearly delighted to be part of the drama. Mike pulled Iris closer, his chin resting on top of her head. "Not scared anymore?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but not of her. I'm terrified of how much I love you, how much I love this life we've built, how much I already love this baby who's going to call you Daddy and think you're the smartest, funniest, most wonderful man in the world. And what are you going to think?" Iris turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd taught her that love didn't have to be a business transaction, that home could be a person instead of a place, that forever was something you chose every single day. "I'm going to think I'm the luckiest woman alive," she said, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that some contracts are worth rewriting." Mike's answer was lost in his kiss, but Iris felt it anyway, in the way his hands cradled her face like she was precious, in the way he held her like he never planned to let go, in the way he loved her like forever was just the beginning. Across the street, Eleanor Johnson eventually drove away, defeated by the simple power of two people who'd chosen each other over fear. But in the garden behind the Beacon Hill mansion, surrounded by white roses and the promise of tomorrow, Iris and Mike Johnson continued building their extraordinary, ordinary, absolutely perfect life. One day, one kiss, one shared dream at a time. Because sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding your soulmate, they're about choosing to become each other's home. What would you have done in Iris's place? Would you have had the courage to fight for love, or would fear have won? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else to choose love over fear. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.